The horror video game genre is extensive to say the least, and while most of us know about the Silent Hills, Resident Evils, and Dead Spaces of the world, there's tons of excellent smaller titles that get lost in the wave of new releases. While video games being more popular than ever and dozens of games hitting storefronts every day is a great thing for players, it means it's almost impossible to stay on top of every great thing coming out, even if you're a niche genre fan. In light of that, we've made a list of a bunch of excellent indie horror games that were released to little to no fanfare to try and help you out. While of course naturally all of these games have been played by somebody, almost all of them have flown so far under the radar that they're sorely underappreciated by most. So we're going to go ahead with our mild exaggeration title and say that nobody played them. That said, if you've played any of these or know of any more underrated indie horror classics, please let us know. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 unsettling indie horror games nobody played. Number 10, Exhibit of Sorrows. Kicking off with a truly bizarre entry, we've got the spooky adventure Exhibit of Sorrows by A Day of Joy. This horror game is playable for free right from your browser and is proof that excellent things do come in small packages, like my new cat. It's fairly non-traditional in structure and genre. You'll navigate back and forth through exhibits in an exhibition entitled The Exhibit of Smiles. Naturally, things go sideways incredibly quickly, and although it's all over in about 20 minutes, it is deeply disturbing, especially if you're unsettled by body horror, torture, or spooky clowns. There's a lot of spooky clowns. Personally, I'm not too fussed about spooky clowns, but the amount of pain and torture you have to inflict on the characters in this game in order to get through it made me legitimately queasy. This one is super easy to have missed out on if you didn't hear about it through word of mouth, so if you're a fan of a free fright, you ought to check it out for yourself. Just don't say I didn't warn you. Number 9, Duck Season. Duck Season was released in 2017 by Stress Level Zero, which can I just say is a hilarious name for a company that makes virtual reality horror games. And that's exactly what Duck Season is, a VR horror game designed to bring you back to the late 80s. The insinuation being that your mum was supposed to buy you Duck Hunt, and instead you ended up with this hellscape where everything is wrong. At least you can shoot the dog in this one. It's an improvement in that way. Everything starts off fine and dandy, albeit with a twisted version of Duck Hunt, but once you see that the dog is clearly a man in a suit or an animatronic giving serious Five Nights at Freddy's vibes, it's clear nothing is chill here. On top of that, plenty of Steam reviews have claimed they've refunded it because it's too scary. You're unlikely to have played this one because of the double whammy of it being both an indie release on Steam and a VR game. But as of 2019, it came out as a non-VR Steam version, so you can check that out if you like the sound of it but don't have a VR headset. It's a clever spin on a classic with a bunch of disturbing lore and 7 different endings, so there's a lot in there. Number 8, Faith, the Unholy Trinity. Admittedly, we are getting a touch more popular here, but we're still firmly in indie territory, and this one's just too good not to talk about. Faith, the Unholy Trinity is a pixel horror game inspired by both the era of retro 8-bit games and the satanic scare of the 1980s, which is really quite a combo. You play as a priest investigating a case of demonic possession that goes about as well as these things ever do, which is to say, poorly. You'll perform exorcisms, cleanse haunted items, and explore the underbelly of a satanic cult in a medley of creepy settings. The game also utilizes rotoscoping to deliver some truly terrifying scares. The retro look and sound works perfectly to build an atmosphere of total unease and dread as you make your way through each chapter of the story. The aesthetics are as fascinatingly unique as they are horrifying, and enough can't be said about the stellar soundtrack and hugely disturbing warped sound effects. There are also loads of secrets to be found if you're brave enough to look for them. Number 7, At Dead of Night. Another horrifying game that's admittedly a touch more popular than some of the other entries on this list, but is still well worth talking about, also because we've got another hilarious developer name. We have At Dead of Night by Baggy Cat Limited. This 2020 horror game is particularly unique as it blends elements of ghost hunting games, traditional horror, and horror movies by way of FMV. The reason I say it's a touch more popular is that a lot of YouTubers and streamers were playing it for a while there, so it may have ended up on your radar. Though there's a decent chance you never picked it up yourself, for the sheer reason that this game looks wear the brown pants scary. You play as Maya, a student trapped in a haunted hotel run by a psychopath, and none of that is good. You'll need to deep dive into the killer Johnny's past using a ghost and spirit voice receiver, as well as digging around the house itself to try and rescue your friends and uncover more about him. And you'll also want to do that while trying not to get murdered. I'll be honest, my heart rate got too high just watching the trailer for this one, but if you can handle it or you've played it already, let the rest of us know how tough you are in the comment box. Number 6, The Closing Shift. Now, there's plenty of great Western horror, but I think a lot of us can agree that nobody does it quite like Japanese horror offerings, and this is a great example of that. Slipping well under the radar when it was released towards the beginning of 2022, The Closing Shift by Chiller's Art pops you in the unfortunate shoes of a waitress working the titular closing shifts at a cafe. There's an optional VHS filter that makes everything look shaky and even more horrifying if somehow this game isn't scary enough for you. It's relatively short, clocking in at around 2 hours, during which you'll hustle around the cafe while gradually realizing you're being stalked. There are a handful of unsettling jump scares, the graphics vary between genuinely realistic and horrifying character models, and there are a bunch of endings to achieve. Spoiler alert, they mostly don't end well. There's also the added horror of working customer service, and that might be worse than the stalking thing. We're not sure, you tell us. Number 5, From the Darkness. There's more than one game on this list where it seems like you're alone, but you're definitely not. And the 2021 psychological horror game From the Darkness by N4BA is absolutely one of those. Known only for a small handful of indie horror games, this studio has crafted a superbly uncomfortable exploration adventure where you're inside an old Soviet apartment that once belonged to your grandfather. And you're in the dark, because of course you are. The apartment is horrifying in and of itself, and not just because it'd still run you $1 million to buy the decrepit piece of crap in Sydney, Australia. It comes packed with creepy dolls, rotting wallpaper, and something crawling around in the dark watching you. There are a handful of really good jump scares, light puzzling, and it's a genuinely frightening and relentlessly tense trip throughout. It'll only take you an hour or two to knock it over, but since you'll be white-knuckling it pretty much the entire time, that might be for the best. Number 4, The Happy Hills Homicide. The Happy Hills Homicide is another free game you can simply download and play right from a browser. It's been a huge underground hit with fans, but you'd be forgiven for never having heard of it. The narrative here is flipped a little though, because instead of being a victim, you play the murdering clown, and you'll need to take out your victims in a bunch of creative and gruesome ways. By gruesome, we really mean gruesome. This game is particularly nasty, even though it uses pixel art and a set of 2D environments. I don't want to give too much away, but you'll shock a guy into knocking his face into a stool, which chops his jaw off, and then you'll smash his buddy's head into a wall until he's been fully unalived. Like I said, nasty. That said, the creativity of planning and executing the kills is genuinely unique and pretty fun. Assuming you don't have a weak stomach, of course. Number 3, Tattletale. If that last one was a little too blood heavy but not scary enough for you, then I hope you were frightened of Furbies as a kid, because this is going to be the fright fest for you. This far down the list, it seems like we can confirm the 80s and 90s were definitely a scarier time, because for this particular adventure, we're kicking it back to 1998, when every boy and girl wanted a Furby. I'm sorry, I mean a Tattletale. This 2016 first-person indie horror has you wandering around the house, tattletale in hand, doing your best to avoid Mama Tattletale, who isn't nearly as kid-friendly as her offspring. Then again, forgetting to feed, brush, recharge, or generally disobey your little Tattletale will result in it making a noise that attracts Mama. If it isn't clear by this point, that is not something you want to do. This is the first game by Waygetter Electronics, and it's a really clever idea with some solid execution. It's also woefully underplayed, so if you need another interesting horror game to add to your pile, you could do much worse than this one, especially since you're getting a decent chunk of horror for a crazy low price. Number 2, Stay Out of the House. There's nothing like a horror game title that's already insinuating you shouldn't play it, but I know for a lot of you fear fanatics out there, that's just going to bait you in more. So let's talk about Puppet Combo's 2022 horror game, Stay Out of the House. Now, Puppet Combo have made exactly 3 horror games that can be found on Steam, and just to give you an idea of the studio, here are their names in order: Murder House, Christmas Massacre, and now Stay Out of the House. This time around, you'll be doing your best to manage your stamina as you venture around a spooky home belonging to a serial killer who is also a cannibal. The game is inspired by 80s slasher films and utilizes a wildly unsettling aesthetic that incorporates lo-fi retro graphics and a creepy VHS overlay. You play as a young woman on a road trip whose boyfriend goes missing prior to your own kidnapping. You'll then need to seek out an escape, decide whether to rescue survivors, and whether to fight back while navigating the madman's house of horrors. On top of that, you'll also have to avoid his twisted family members. While it's comforting that even cannibalistic serial killers have family that'll stick by them, nothing about the rest of this game is reassuring in the slightest. Number 1. No one lives under the lighthouse. Spoiler alert, someone lives under the lighthouse. Shocking, I know. In Mariva Collective's self-proclaimed slow burn retro horror, things move at a milder pace than they do in some of the other games on this list, but somehow that only adds to the tension. You're the new lighthouse keeper, but not the kind anybody is gonna want to marry and keep company, because your lighthouse is mad haunted, and the last guy went missing, which is deeply uncool. The story delves into places that are deeply Lovecraftian, with genuine scares, a palpable sense of place and creepy atmosphere, as well as well-crafted sound design. While it seems like you're just going through the motions, doing monotonous tasks in your new gig, we've learned by this point in the list that nothing is as it appears. It's all delightfully unsettling as you try and unfold the secrets of your predicament, the setting, and what lies in the darkness, or in this case, under the lighthouse. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you have any more picks for sorely underrated horror games that pretty much nobody has played. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonnell, but please do make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.